Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic, serious. Let's do it. What split second or last minute decision did you make that ended up saving your life? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Driving 80 miles per hour on a lonely interstate in the middle of the night, I decided to change lanes for no reason and ended up missing a crumpled car in the middle of the lane I just left. It looked like a professionally crushed car that had fallen off a truck. No light, lenses, or reflectors. Grabbing a middle schooler's backpack as she was about to cross without looking or staying on the sidewalk instead of crossing the road. I was in high school at the time. The reason? The red car that had almost run me over a few weeks before was barreling down the street at high speed. The car zooms past at that moment. The kid and I would have been in the middle of the road. Same driver. I recognized the shade of blonde hair. Was involved in a bombing. I knelt down to sign something when the detonation happened. Glass shards were a hair away from killing me. The person who gave me the paper to sign technically saved me. They're fine too. Nowhere as extreme as some of these, but I used to go for walks in a nature park right behind my neighborhood, usually with headphones. On one such walk, I happened to look down to see that the foot I was currently stepping with was about 6 inches from coming down in a diamondback rattlesnake. It was arched back, ready to strike, rattle going, but I couldn't hear it over my music. I leapt back immediately and walked around it without issue, but holy crap, it gets my heart going just thinking about it. I woke up in the middle of the night because a voice in my head was yelling at me, telling me to lock a nearby door. I reluctantly got up, locked the door, and fell back asleep immediately. About 30 minutes later, somebody tried breaking in. I was caught in a bar brawl. I tumbled to the bottom of a crowd and was pressed to the floor when some psycho was on my back choking me. Couldn't move and couldn't breathe. I thought that was it. I was going to die on the floor of a New Jersey nightclub. Suddenly, I remembered a move my wrestling coach taught us to break grips. I found his thumb, folded it as a fist, and squeezed as hard as I could. It cracked like a stick. I could hear him scream in my ear, and he hopped off. I pushed up and swung my way out. I choked so hard that both of my eyes were full of blood, no whites, and I cracked a molar. That was a close one. And who knows what would have happened if I didn't call that one random move, or if I never wrestled to begin with. Scary. Even having some very simple and basic self-defense tactics could save your life. I mean, would it always work? No, but it might work when you most need it. I was in high school and driving home from a robotics team party when I felt like instinct took over and I slammed on the brakes at 50 miles per hour. A car plowed through the intersection in front of me, hit a curb, and left with a drunken weave. I realized that if I hadn't stopped, I likely would have gotten hit. At that point, I found the nearest parking lot and had a panic attack for an hour before driving to my parents. When I was in 9th grade, I was walking to church on a Sunday morning. My friends stopped and asked if I wanted to go riding with them. I thought about going, but something stopped me from getting in the car. Later that afternoon, 2 of my friends in the car died in an accident. I was in an accident back in 2008. I was going to college on my motorcycle, which is pretty common where I come from. It had just stopped raining. I was about to overtake a vehicle when a tuk-tuk came out of nowhere from the street. I hit the brake real hard, but still the rear tires touched and I was in the air. That's when it dawned on me that it was either my right arm or my head. I let my right arm get crushed and saved my skull. Properly healed in 50 days. I've never had trouble writing with my right hand as I cannot handle pens properly. I learned to write with my left hand and went on with my life. I made a horrible decision to intervene in a parking lot machine robbery. As I was the caged gate of the parking lot, he swung his crowbar at me. Somehow I moved in the right direction to avoid his strikes. I still don't know how his crowbar didn't hit me. He also screamed like a gorilla, but I didn't die that night, and I was very close to it. I've never felt so stupid or relieved that he didn't tag me. Heroin is bad, kids. It will make you a coin robber who almost became a murderer for like $8 in coins. Previously, I was a biker. I'm sure you all know the risks. One time, it was any other day riding to work. I pull up to the lights and check the car next to me. girl in her mid-20s on her phone. I revved my engine to get her to look at me. She doesn't. She proceeds to go straight on into my lane. I had planned for this. Half the reason I don't ride now is because other people are morons. Happened at a river after pulling an all-nighter with a group of friends, hungover and sleep-deprived while swimming, and without giving it any thought, I swam into a waterfall. I completely underestimated the power of kinetic energy. I went under like a twig and couldn't get back up. In my panic, I kicked my legs forward and somehow managed to push off the underwater rocks facing the cliffside. Nobody saw anything. I was as good as dead if it weren't for that fortuitous move. I asked a stranger standing out on the street for weed with my friend on a late night out. I was still a teenager. A stranger told us he was too drunk to drive, but his car was parked up the block. If we drove him, he'd take us to where we could get some. I get in the driver's seat, adjust everything, seatbelt check, turn on the car and put it into drive, but keep my foot on the brake. I didn't have my license, and this was maybe my 4th time ever driving a car. A white Charger pulls up next to us, and a guy with a bandana on the lower half of his face runs up to my window and points a gun at me. It looked like a revolver. The window was closed. That split second felt like a lifetime, but I slammed on the gas and swerved out of the parallel park job. Stopped at a stop sign at the end of the block. Internal screaming intensifies, like, why am I stopping at a stop sign? I kept going, ran a couple red lights, made a few turns, and parked somewhere I knew I was hidden much safer. This was pretty late at night and basically my hometown. I was a dumb teenager. My friend and I were chilling at a skate park. There was a basketball hoop made out of stone. I was sitting right underneath that hoop. Suddenly I got the urge to stand up. Seconds later, this massive thing came crashing down where I sat seconds before. I didn't comprehend it in that moment, but I often think about it from time to time, and a shiver goes down my spine. My friend was as scared as F. I was carried away by a current while swimming at a beach. The beach was protected by a rock formation, but I stupidly swam past it and was swept away. The rest of the coastline was more or less a sheer rock cliff. I managed to spot a very tiny spot that I could swim ashore to, but the waves kept throwing me against the rocks that sat just below the surface. I decided to try to swim ashore by grabbing onto the rocks between waves and holding on for dear life as the waves came over me so that I wouldn't end up like shredded cheese. I managed to get to shore, and I later realized that if I hadn't done exactly what I did, I'd be dead. When I was 9, I loved sleeping in my older brother's waterbed upstairs when he decided to live with my dad instead. One cold January night, I decided against it for some reason. I ended up sleeping in my own bed downstairs. A massive earthquake hit in the middle of the night, and the headboard with tons of shelves on it ended up crashing down into my brother's waterbed. I would have been seriously injured if I had been sleeping in that bed that night. So here's a really serious question. Does anyone still have a waterbed, or did that go away? Me and my friend were crossing a tall train bridge in his hometown while mildly intoxicated. We had called his mom to ask when the train went by, but she said that one went by daily around noon. It was 4:30ish, so we were all set. We were halfway across when we heard the train whistle. The problem was that we were above a river valley, so the whistle echoed and we couldn't tell which way it was coming. Then we ended up scurrying back the way we came. And at the moment we jumped off of the embankment, the train barreled around the corner immediately in front of us. If we had chosen to continue across rather than turn back, we wouldn't have made it. Driving a friend home in the middle of the night. We were working at a mine in the middle of the Mojave Desert. He had worked a double shift, so I offered to drive his car. I was doing at least 80, and an oncoming car swerved into our lane. I swerved into the lane, and we passed each other in the wrong lanes. It was just an automatic reaction, and we barely missed a head-on collision. I'm not sure if they were trying to commit suicide or just play chicken, but I didn't really miss, and I'm sure if he had been driving, he would have been so tired we would have been killed. When I was in my early 20s, I was working with a company that laid the groundwork for new neighborhoods. In the winter, at the end of the day, the laborer crew would spend a few minutes scraping mud off of excavator tracks. One day, I was in between the two tracks, scraping away mud. Suddenly, my colleagues are shouting, almost screaming my name. Although I didn't see it, it instantly occurred to me that they would only be that terrified if the excavator was still in motion and I was about to be pinned between the rear counterweight and the track. I dropped to my knees and rolled away with less than a second to spare. The rear of the excavator swung across where I had just been standing. Had I been later, I'd have been cut in half. The operator thought we were done. We didn't mention it to anyone. You know, you are at that age once in a while. I still think about it. Scary stuff. 13 or 14, was walking home and it started to storm. A man in a car that I recognized from the neighborhood stopped and asked if I wanted to ride. I sure jumped in. Our house was on a really long hill, back when they put houses into the landscape instead of flattening everything. And at that point, he should have started down slowing. He started accelerating, just opened the door, and rolled out into the asphalt at 30 to 35 miles per hour. I used to work for a company that manufactured modular oil camps. We worked in shipping, loading semis with the trailer units for them to take up north. The units were stored on cribs in a giant lot, and after a lot of rain, a couple of the units fell down when the ground got too muddy and the crib shifted. Me and another laborer had to crawl under one of the units while a forklift lifted it to grab and reset the cribs. When we were underneath, I heard a loud cracking and looked up, and the whole trailer was coming down. We scampered out of the side right before it crashed to the ground right behind us. Almost became a puddle in the puddle. Maybe not died, but been seriously injured and facially disfigured. The rescue dog, for some reason, freaked out and attacked me. Right before it happened, I sat up and gently pushed his face away from mine. He had been whining and trying to lick my face while I was stretched out on the couch. Some instinct told me to sit up, push his face away, and do it now. I ended up with a huge hole in my arm, and he kept coming, trying to take me down. If my husband hadn't been there, the dog would have kept going until he got me down and kept me there. This isn't really a rash decision, but I'm going to go ahead and tell my story. One night I decided to go to bed earlier than usual after playing video games. Later that night, I heard some gunshots near my window and hit the floor to escape the gunfire. When I got to the ground, I noticed a bullet in my doorframe. The bullet trajectory just so happened to cross the area where I play every time late at night. If I hadn't decided to go to bed early that night, I probably wouldn't be here to share this tale. My work flew me into Costa Rica. I prefer not to specify the city at night. I got to my hotel around 7 or 8 p.m. and I wanted something to eat as I hadn't eaten in hours. I remembered seeing a Subway just up the street from my hotel, put my earbuds in and walked to Subway. I got there and got the sandwich and began walking back to the hotel room. When I got a block away, and a white van drove up quickly in front of me at the crossing, and this man started yelling at me in Spanish. I can faintly hear it through my earbuds. For a split second, I gave myself the choice to stop and figure out what he was going on, or to start walking faster around the back of the van and just keep looking forward. I took out one of my earbuds so I could hear better and began walking quickly around the back of the van. I could hear a sliding door while the van's backup lights were turned on and it started to back up. I started speed walking away, and at last, probably 20 feet it would take to get to the hotel, I began running. The feeling of trying to remain calm while booking it had started to turn into fear. And once I got the doors to the hotel, I looked back up the street to see the white van speeding off in the opposite direction. I still don't know if it was actually what I thought it was going to happen, or if I just misunderstood the situation. Either way, I personally believe that split second changed my life, because normally I'd stop and try to figure out what's going on in any other situation. I wouldn't have died, but my mom would have. Last year, my mom had this problem where she didn't pee for 3 days. She didn't make a big deal about it until she mentioned it to one of our coworkers. We work with special needs children, so we work with the nursery every day. The coworker had mentioned that it was not normal or good that we should see the schedule an emergency appointment with her PCP. There was availability that day around 2. It was currently 10 to 11, so she took a small nap. After the nap, she was a complete ragdoll. I mean 100% body weight. She could barely talk. On the drive to the doctor's office, she got worse, just mumbling and raising her eyebrows. Thank effing God, the nearest hospital is literally across the street from her PCP. So all I had to do was turn right instead of left. She was admitted right away, and after a few days, she was put onto dialysis. She isn't permanently on it. She only needed it for a few days. I think it was like 3 to 4 days, but the doctors at the hospital think that if I didn't take her to the hospital, she'd be dead.